Story 1. Don't Stay Here After Dark. A Tale of Heaven. Brook. You find a lot of strange things digging through old newspaper archives. Forgotten towns, ghost stories, local legends. But you never find a town that doesn't exist. At least, I never had. Until I found a single, brittle clipping from 1887 that mentioned a place called Heaven Brook. The article was simple, a report on a record harvest. But when I went to find Heaven Brook on a map, any map, old or new, it wasn't there. My curiosity got the best of me. I used the article's landmarks to triangulate a potential location, deep in a part of the state the highways had forgotten. And I went looking for it. Finding Heaven Brook was like stepping through a veil. One moment I was on a dirt road surrounded by nothing but dense forest, the next, I was on a paved street lined with quaint, well-kept houses. A sign, freshly painted, read, "Welcome to Heaven Brook." Population, 152. The people were normal. They smiled, waved. Kids played in their yards. It was a perfect picture of small-town life. I spent the day talking to them, explaining I was a researcher. They were friendly, but reserved. When I asked why the town wasn't on any maps, they would just smile and say something like, "We're a quiet folk," or "We like our privacy." As dusk approached, a strange tension settled over the town. People hurried inside, the streets emptied, and a profound silence fell. I retreated to the small inn where I had rented a room, feeling a sense of unease I couldn't shake. That's when I saw the first one. Through my window, I watched as something emerged from the forest at the edge of town. It was impossibly tall and thin, like a stretched-out shadow given form. It didn't walk, it glided over the pavement, its head slowly turning from side to side, as if scanning the houses. It passed my window, and for a heart-stopping second, I felt its gaze on me, a cold, analytical presence that seemed to peel back my skin and look right into my soul. This was the Watcher, I would later learn. It never touches, it only observes, a silent warden of this open-air prison. Soon after, others began their procession. A low, swirling mist drifted down the center of the street. But it wasn't mist. As it drew closer, I could see it was a swarm of tiny, chittering things, like insects made of smoke and spite. They whispered as they passed, 1,000 voices speaking at once in a language that scraped at the edges of my sanity. They swirled around a lamppost, their whispers growing louder, more insistent, before moving on. Then came the true horror. From the deep shadows of an alleyway, a creature of pure nightmare unfolded itself. It wasn't just a mass of tangled limbs, it was a knot of glistening, black sinew and bone that seemed to writhe and reconfigure itself with every movement. A faint, cloying smell, like rotten meat and damp earth, wafted through my open window. It moved low to the ground, its many-jointed legs clicking softly on the asphalt with a horrifying, unnatural speed. This was a snatcher. It scurried across a perfectly manicured lawn and stopped dead in front of a small, blue house. For a full 10 seconds, it was perfectly still, a sculpture of death. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then, with a motion so fast it was almost invisible, one of its limbs shot out like a spear. The sound of shattering glass was like a gunshot in the silence, followed instantly by a single, choked scream that was cut brutally short. The creature retracted its limb, dragging a struggling shape out through the broken window frame. There was no fight, no chance. Without a sound, the snatcher scurried back into the shadows, its victim gone as if they had been nothing more than a whisper, erased from existence. The next morning, the town was disgustingly normal again. I walked past the blue house, my legs feeling like lead. The window was neatly boarded up with fresh planks of wood. A woman was watering flowers on the porch, the same woman who I'd seen with her husband the day before. She looked up at me and gave a small, tight smile. Her eyes were hollow. I tried to speak, to offer some kind of condolence, but the words died in my throat. What could I say? I'm sorry a monster from your worst fears dragged your husband into the darkness. She just nodded, turned, and went inside. No one mentioned the man who was gone. No one acknowledged the nightly parade of abominations. It was then I realized the full, soul-crushing truth. Heaven Brook isn't on any map because it's not a place you can leave, it's a cage. It's a feeding ground. A pantry, meticulously maintained. The people here are livestock, living out their placid days under the watchful eyes of their keepers, praying they aren't the one chosen when the sun goes down. And now, I'm one of them. My research is meaningless. My old life is a dream. I'm writing this down on the back of a receipt, my pen shaking. This isn't for a newspaper or an archive. It's a warning. A message in a bottle from a place that doesn't exist, a final act of defiance from a dead man. The sun is setting, painting the sky in bloody shades of orange and purple. The silence is returning. I can hear the first whispers starting on the wind, the faint, distant clicking of the snatcher. They're coming. And I'm just hoping, with every fiber of my being, that tonight they pass me by. Story 2: The Town That Forgets. My thumb had been out for 6 hours, a silent plea to the indifferent highway, when the beat-up pickup truck finally pulled over. The driver, a weathered old man with a kind face, offered me a ride as far as his turn-off. "That'll put you near Everwood," he said. "Quiet place. Good place to rest your head for a night." He wasn't wrong. The town, nestled in a valley and cradled by dense pine forests, was postcard perfect. Tidy houses with white picket fences, a main street that looked like it was designed by Norman Rockwell, and in the center of it all, a town square with a charming gazebo. The only thing that seemed out of place was the colossal radio tower that stood on the ridge overlooking the town. It was a skeletal giant of red and white steel, stark and industrial against the soft, green landscape. I checked into the only motel, a small, clean place run by a woman who gave me a placid, unwavering smile. My first day in Everwood was pleasant. I ate at the local diner, served by a cheerful waitress named Clara who recommended the cherry pie. Best in the state, she promised with a wink. I watched a young couple, Mark and Sarah, have a hushed but intense argument in the town square, their faces a mask of frustration before they stormed off in opposite directions. I bought a new book from a grumpy shopkeeper who complained about the shipment being late. It was all so normal. The quintessential small-town experience. As evening fell, a low, almost subsonic hum seemed to fill the air, emanating from the direction of the tower on the ridge. I barely noticed it, my eyelids heavy after a long day. I fell asleep to the gentle rhythm of crickets and that faint, persistent hum. I woke up the next morning feeling refreshed. I went back to the diner for breakfast. Clara greeted me with a cheerful smile. "You look like a man who needs some of our cherry pie," she said with a wink. "Best in the state." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. It was the exact same line, the exact same intonation. A weird coincidence, I told myself. But then, as I walked down Main Street, I saw Mark and Sarah in the town square. Their faces were masks of frustration as they had the same hushed, intense argument. Later, I passed the bookshop. The grumpy owner was standing outside, muttering to himself. "Shipment's late again," he grumbled to me as I passed. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to settle in my gut. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a replay. The third day confirmed my terror. The fourth cemented it into a horrifying certainty. I was trapped. Not me, precisely. The town was trapped. I was the only audience member in a theater playing the same show, day after day. I tried to intervene. I warned Mark not to say the thing that would trigger the argument with Sarah. He just looked at me with a blank, confused stare and did it anyway. I told Clara I'd already had her pie. She just smiled her placid smile and told me I really had to try it. My actions were meaningless, ripples in a pond that smoothed over by the next morning, leaving no trace. I was a ghost, haunting their perfect, repeating day. My obsession turned to the tower. It was the source. It had to be. The low hum it emitted each evening was the trigger, the great reset button. I started watching it, studying it. During the day it was silent, but as dusk approached, the hum would begin, and a faint, pulsing red light at its peak would begin to glow. It felt like a predator, watching over its herd, lulling them into a state of perpetual ignorance. My investigation led me to the mayor. Mayor Albright was a portly man with a warm smile that never quite reached his cold, intelligent eyes. I found him in his office in the town hall, arranging ship-in-a-bottle models on his windowsill. "You're the hitchhiker," he said without turning around. "You're not forgetting, are you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "You know," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You know what's happening." Albright finally turned, his expression one of paternal disappointment. "Knowing is a burden, son. Here in Everwood, we offer a release from that burden. We offer peace." He explained it with a chilling calmness. The tower broadcast a low-frequency signal every night. It didn't just erase memories, it carefully pruned them, resetting the town's consciousness to the beginning of that specific day. "Sorrow, regret, grief, these things fester," he said, gesturing to the peaceful town outside his window. "We provide a sanctuary from the wounds of time. Every day is a fresh start. No grudges. No lasting pain." "This isn't peace," I shot back, my voice rising. "It's a cage. You're harvesting them." The mayor's smile finally vanished. Harvesting is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as collecting. The emotional resonance of a repeated day creates a unique energy. A powerful one. The tower gathers that energy. And for what? I demanded. "What do you do with it?" "I don't do anything with it," he said, his eyes drifting towards the tower on the ridge. "It does." That was when I knew I had to destroy it. I waited until the next day, the same day, of course, and I ran. I ran past Clara in the diner, past the arguing couple, past the grumpy shopkeeper. I ran for the ridge, for the skeletal red and white tower. The climb was steep, tearing at my lungs. As I got closer, the hum was no longer a background noise, it was a physical pressure against my skull. I reached the chain-link fence at the base of the tower and found the gate unlocked. Inside the small maintenance building at the tower's base, there was no complex machinery. There was only a single, metal chair, surrounded by thick, humming cables that snaked up into the ceiling. And sitting in the chair was a man. His eyes were open but completely vacant, a thin line of drool tracing a path down his chin. He was alive, but he wasn't there. On a small plaque at the base of the chair, a name was engraved, Mayor Albright. My blood ran cold. I heard the door creak open behind me. It was Albright, the man from the town hall. Or rather, the thing that looked like him. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," he said, his voice now flat, inhuman. "The mayor is just a role. A familiar face to keep the flock calm. The last one lasted 70 years of repeated days before he burned out." He gestured to the man in the chair. "His consciousness powers the signal now. It's so much more potent when it comes from someone who remembers." He took a step closer, and I saw his form flicker, like a bad television signal. "We've been waiting for you, Leo. It's been a while since we had a fresh battery. The signal is getting weak." I finally understood the full, soul-shattering horror. The town wasn't a cage for them. It was a trap for me. For anyone like me, immune to the signal. We were the real harvest. I turned to run, but the hum from the cables intensified into a deafening roar. My muscles locked, my vision swam, and the last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Albright's cold, empty eyes, and the vacant metal chair, waiting for its next occupant. Story 3: The Festival of the Harvest Man. My travel blog, The Wandering Lens, was built on a simple premise: find the places that time, and tourists, had forgotten. I specialized in the authentic, the untouched corners of the world. So when I stumbled upon a faded flyer in a dusty antique shop for the Amberfield Harvest Festival, I felt a jolt of pure discovery. The flyer promised a tradition unbroken for 200 years, in a town that didn't appear on any modern map. It was exactly the kind of story I craved. After a week of cross-referencing old county records and satellite images, I found it, a tiny, isolated valley accessible only by a single, winding road. I packed my camera gear, my car, and a sense of profound excitement. My first sight of Amberfield was breathtaking. It was a perfect autumn painting brought to life. Golden light filtered through trees ablaze with red and orange leaves. The air smelled of wood smoke, damp earth, and something sweet, like baked apples. The town itself was rustic and charming, with a single main street and fields of corn and pumpkin stretching out in every direction. But as I drove slowly past the first few farmhouses, a prickle of unease traced its way down my spine. The scarecrows. There were dozens of them. Not just in the fields, but on porches, in gardens, leaning against fences. They were all meticulously crafted from burlap and straw, but there was something unnervingly lifelike about their postures. Some leaned forward as if whispering a secret, others had their heads cocked, as if listening intently. Their button eyes, black and glossy, seemed to follow my car as I passed. The townsfolk, however, were incredibly welcoming. When I explained I was a travel blogger here to document the festival, they treated me like a celebrity. The mayor himself, a stout man named Elias, shook my hand vigorously and offered me a room at the town's only inn, free of charge. "It's the least we can do for our honored guest," he boomed, his smile wide and genuine. Everyone I met shared that same intense, almost feverish hospitality. They were eager to tell me about the festival, but their language was strange. They spoke of the gifting and the soil's due with a chilling reverence. "The harvest man provides, so we provide for him," a farmer told me, his eyes glancing towards a scarecrow in his field that bore a startling resemblance to him, only older. "This year's bounty was the greatest in memory," he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "We are truly blessed." The feeling of being watched became my constant companion. The button eyes of the scarecrow seemed to burn into my back wherever I went. One evening, I tried to take a long exposure shot of a particularly grim-looking one silhouetted against the sunset. As the camera shutter clicked, I could have sworn I saw its head twitch, just a fraction of an inch. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, but my hands were shaking as I packed my tripod away. Later that night, walking back to the inn, I saw a new scarecrow sitting in a rocking chair on a porch that had been empty that afternoon. Its straw-stuffed clothes were eerily familiar. They looked exactly like the ones I had seen on a young man working in the fields earlier. My journalistic curiosity eventually led me to the town's oldest resident, a woman named Maeve. She lived in a small cottage on the edge of town, surrounded by a garden filled with at least a dozen silent, watching scarecrows. Her eyes were milky with age, but her mind was sharp. She was the first to speak the name of the entity they served. "The harvest man isn't made of straw and cloth, child," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "He is the spirit of the soil itself. The hunger in the roots. Every year, on the final night of the festival, he walks the fields to choose his champion." "Champion?" I asked, my pen hovering over my notepad. "The one who is chosen to become part of the land," she explained, a strange ecstasy in her voice. "Their essence feeds the soil, guaranteeing the next year's bounty. It is the greatest honor." She gestured to the scarecrows in her garden. "My father is here. My husband. They look after me." She showed me a brittle, leather-bound photo album. Page after page of smiling faces at past festivals. In each group photo, she would point to one person. He was the champion of '68, she'd say, pointing to a young man. In the photo from '69, he was gone. But standing in the background was a new scarecrow I hadn't noticed before, one with the same lanky build and shock of dark hair. My blood ran cold. I wasn't documenting a festival, I was documenting a lineage of sacrifice. The night of the festival arrived with a palpable energy. A massive bonfire was built in the center of the largest cornfield, and the entire town gathered, their faces illuminated by torchlight. They handed me a woven crown of wheat and corn husks, placing it on my head. For the honored guest, Mayor Elias said, his eyes gleaming. The music was lively, the food was plentiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of a net tightening around me. As midnight approached, the music stopped. The townsfolk formed a wide, silent circle around the unlit bonfire. In the center of the circle was a thick, 10-foot-tall wooden post, like a cross without the arms. "It is time for the gifting," the mayor announced, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "Our soil has been blessed by the generosity of outsiders in the past. Their spirit makes our harvest strong." He turned and looked directly at me. Every head in the circle turned with him. Their friendly smiles were gone, replaced by a single, hungry expression. "And this year, we have been blessed with a truly special guest." Panic, pure and absolute, seized me. I turned to run, but the farmer who had spoken to me days before grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron. They dragged me, kicking and screaming, towards the post in the center of the circle. And then, the true nightmare began. From the rows of corn, the scarecrows began to move. It wasn't a sudden motion, but a slow, horrifying awakening. They pulled their wooden stakes from the earth with a sound of tearing roots, their straw limbs rustling, their button eyes fixed on me. They were the champions of years past, the guardians of the ritual. They tied me to the post, my camera smashing on the ground beside me. The townsfolk began a low, rhythmic chant, a song in a language that felt older than the trees. As they chanted, a figure emerged from the darkest part of the cornfield. It was tall and gaunt, a silhouette made of twisted roots, dried vines, and packed earth. It was the harvest man. It carried no scythe. In one hand, it held a large, burlap sack. In the other, a thick, curved needle, already threaded with black, tarry-looking twine. The mayor leaned in close to my ear, his breath hot and smelling of cider. "Don't worry," he whispered, his voice full of chilling sincerity. "You'll look after our fields forever. The soil remembers its own." Story for the town of perfect symmetry. As an architect, I've always been drawn to the anomalies of urban design, the crooked streets of old European cities, the chaotic layouts of ancient capitals. But my true obsession was with order. Not just any order, but perfect, impossible order. It's what led me to the whispers of a place called Equilibrium. I found it mentioned only in the footnotes of an obscure, out-of-print architectural treatise from the 1920s. It was described as a sociological and architectural experiment in absolute balance, a town built on the principle of perfect, mirrored symmetry. There were no photographs, no maps, just a single, cryptic coordinate. It took me months, but I found it, tucked away in a valley so remote it felt like a secret held by the mountains themselves. The first view of Equilibrium was enough to make my heart pound with a mixture of awe and profound unease. It was flawless. A single main street, running perfectly east to west, acted as a mirror. For every colonial-style house on the north side, there was an identical one on the south. Every oak tree, every wrought iron lamppost, every picket fence had its exact twin across the street. It was a blueprint brought to life with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. I checked into the North Side Inn, a lovely building with a blue door and a sprawling rosebush. Across the street, the South Side Inn stood as its perfect reflection, right down to the last petal on the last rose. The innkeeper on my side, a woman named Alara, moved with a quiet, deliberate grace. Her counterpart on the south side, a man named Elias, mirrored her every action from across the street. When Alara polished the front desk, Elias did the same. When she stepped outside to sweep the porch, he emerged to do the same. This unnerving ballet was performed by the entire town. At precisely 8:05 a.m., a man from a north side house and a man from the corresponding south side house would get into identical vintage cars and drive away. Two women, one from the north, one from the south, would begin watering their identical flower beds at the exact same moment. It was a town of ghosts, all dancing to a silent, synchronized rhythm. My architectural curiosity gave way to a creeping dread. This wasn't just disciplined routine, it was something else. The first crack in my rational mind appeared on my third day. I was sketching the town square when a little girl on the south side tripped and scraped her knee, letting out a sharp cry. Instantly, across the square, her north side twin, who had been standing perfectly still, stumbled as if pushed by an invisible hand. He clutched his own knee, his face contorting in pain. When his mother rolled up his trouser leg, I saw it from across the square, a raw, red scrape, identical in shape and placement to the girl's. The town wasn't just symmetrical in form, it was symmetrical in experience. It was a single organism living in two bodies. I had to test it. That night, under the cover of darkness, I crept out and nudged a small, ceramic garden gnome on a north side lawn about 6 inches to the left. The next morning, I watched from my window as the owner of the south side house came out, a look of pained confusion on his face. He grabbed his own gnome and tried to move it, his muscles straining as if he were pushing against an immense, unseen weight. With a final, desperate grunt, he managed to shove it 6 inches to the left, and a wave of visible relief washed over him. I felt sick. This was a prison of the highest order. I sought out Alara, the innkeeper. I confronted her with what I'd seen. She didn't deny it. Her placid smile never wavered. "The balance must be maintained, Mr. Crane," she said softly. "It is the covenant that gives us our peace. Our prosperity. The town is an equation. It does not tolerate anomalies." Her words became terrifyingly real the following evening. An ambulance, its siren respectfully silent, pulled up to a house on the south side. They carried out a body bag. An elderly man, Mr. Gable from the south, had passed away in his sleep. A wave of palpable panic rippled through the town. The synchronized routines faltered. People moved with a jerky, anxious energy. Across the street from the now empty house, the north side Mr. Gable, a man named Gabriel, stared out his window, his face a mask of pure terror. He was now an imbalance. A variable without a corresponding number. An error in the equation. The next morning, Gabriel didn't emerge from his house. I saw the townsfolk gathering on the main street, their faces grim. They weren't looking at Gabriel's house with sympathy, but with a cold, terrifying resolve. They were surgeons preparing to remove a tumor. I ran to Alara's desk. "What are you going to do?" I demanded. "The equation must be solved," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "An empty space creates a debt. The balance demands payment." She explained the town's horrific calculus. When a resident died, the town had 2 ways to restore its symmetry. The first, and simplest, was to eliminate the counterpart, erasing the variable from both sides of the equation. The second was to introduce a new, corresponding variable. To fill the empty house. "You're going to kill him," I whispered in horror. "The balance must be maintained," she repeated, her eyes as cold and hard as river stones. But then, her gaze shifted. It moved from me to the empty house across the street, and then back to me. A slow, chilling smile spread across her lips. "Or," she said, her voice silky smooth, "a new resident could fill the empty space. A man with no ties. An unassigned variable. Someone, for instance, who is currently staying at the Northside Inn. The gathered townsfolk on the street slowly turned their heads in unison, their eyes locking onto me. They were no longer looking at Gabriel's house. They were looking at me. I was the solution. I looked from the empty house of the deceased Mr. Gable, to the terrified face of his twin, Gabriel, trapped in his own home. And then I looked at the Northside Inn, my temporary home, and its perfect, waiting twin across the street. They weren't asking me to stay. They were showing me where I now lived. My fascination with order had led me into its very heart, and I was now a permanent, unchangeable part of its perfect, horrifying design.